Welcome to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast with your host, counselor, and trauma recovery coach, AJ Mahari. AJ has over 30 years experience specializing in recovery from BPD relationship breakups and offers expert knowledge, in-depth understanding delivered with compassion and empathy. To purchase and book sessions, please visit ajmahari.ca. Welcome to the show. Here's your host, AJ Mahari.
Borderline X, beware of the Hoover.
What people have to realize is that borderline Hoovers, they're about what the borderline wants and needs. They're not at all about you.
That's what they do in these Hoovers. They just come to tell you what you want to hear, doesn't really mean anything, and isn't going to be about any change. So the commenter asks, why does the borderline reach out when she finds out that I have finally recovered from her discard, have moved on and reshaped my life, says the commenter, and I'm with someone else? Only then she reaches out. What does this mean? I bet you this probably happens to more people than people would think. And what I find really interesting about that is the fact that people can move on. People do move on. Usually, I'm out here to work with you if I resonate with you, because usually there's a healing and recovery process that's best for people to take before moving on. Because more often than not, people will end up in another cluster B relationship. If, you have BP relationship breakup, and you have codependency, and then you go to, you don't take that time to heal and recover from the relationship breakup and the codependency, your family of origin, those kind of things, as I'm always talking about. People jump to the next relationship, codependents, end up with other cluster Bs more often than not. Here's what I really need to say, first of all, to this commenter. With all due respect, of course, right? Here's the thing. So only then they reach out, right? This person has recovered from a relationship, moved on, which I hear that, I believe that. But what's lingering that only then she reached out? What does it mean? Because I guess here's the thing, right? How has one really fully healed and recovered? And I believe the person, when they say they recovered and they moved on, they're doing really well. It's probably next to really turn the corner from the BPD-X. But to ask, what does this mean, sort of infers that the commenter might, there's maybe different ways to interpret this, but it might mean that the commenter really is like maybe starting to feel some guilt or regret that they didn't maybe do something differently, or maybe not, maybe just confusion and kind of be, I'm with somebody else, I moved on and recovered. Now she reaches out when maybe the inference there is, and I wanted her to reach out so much before, or I waited so long, or I tried so hard, or it was, I wanted her to reach out before and it was so difficult and she didn't. And so this commenter goes on to recover, hopefully, by working on themselves with someone in a process. And then they're like, so I'm finally moved on and reshaped their life, they say. And there was someone else, and then only then she reaches out. What does it mean? Well, what do you think? You experienced this before. And what was that experience like for you? Did you wonder what it meant, or did you entertain? How was that? Because I think that what does this mean? Only now she reaches out. What does this mean? Likely that this person, even though they've moved on and done likely a tremendous amount of recovery and healing, is still feeling something that goes back to being about the X in a way that might be frustrating, could be anger producing, could be that this person's having maybe not big regrets, but maybe a sense of regret. Like, why would she reach out now? What does this mean? Well, the bad news on that side for some people might be wow, you moved on and you really healed and changed a lot, but you might still have something there you didn't quite work through. Could mean that, and that for some people this might be a calling card to like recycle and leave the person they're with, depending, which really I wouldn't advocate for anyone doing that. Or it could be that this person really has moved on, is not interested in the BPDX anymore, and they're like, now they reach out. What does this mean? Well, and let's look at the other side of it, right? Which is hopefully people that have moved on in another relationship don't look back, don't engage the Hoover, and that what it probably mostly means, regardless of whether one still has interest or would change their life or not, because finally the BPD reaches out when you've already moved on. It's probably like any Hoover, really, where the person with BPD has been with someone else, didn't work out, fell apart like most of the relationships will when they go from one to the other, and they don't get in any treatment or whatever either. So it's likely that the person with BPD discarded and ghosted someone else, if that's their pattern, or got broken up with again, depending. And so now they're looking back to that last ex. And what is that? It's a Hoover reaching out when somebody's already moved on and everything. And hopefully they didn't move on too quickly, right? But I wonder how much time's gone by. But this is like any borderline Hoover. Why do I say that? Because they always Hoover back for what they want, for what they need, whether they actually are totally aware of that or not. Because often when they Hoover and they reach out, and if people read, hear, listen, whatever way they reach out, engage that Hoover, then you're going to be hearing a lot of what you want to hear.
And regardless of where you are, in terms of being over the relationship or not, when a Hoover comes from a borderline, most people still have a little bit of risk factor there, if they will re-engage or not. And regardless of where you are, in terms of being over the relationship or not, when a Hoover comes from a borderline, most people still have a little bit of risk factor there, if they will re-engage or not. And it's important to realize that what you want to hear isn't really healthy for you. What you might really want to hear or feel you need to hear is going to lead you in a really painful direction, potentially, of recycle, getting rewounded, and coming out the other side again, having lost a lot of the growth that you might have achieved so far, even if you're sort of in still the limbo state, or you're not exactly over that person with BPD, you still have a lot of work to do in your healing and recovery. So it's really important to know BPD Hoovers, again, they're about the borderline. And this commenter had said that she hoovered and reached out to him after she found out that he moved on. Do you see how that's all about the person with BPD? Oh, you moved on. What? What would that mean for somebody with BPD? Now it's really over? Now you're going to leave me? Now you're just going to abandon me? Meanwhile, the commenter did say that the person with BPD had discarded him. This is the thing I really want you to take away from this episode, is that when people with BPD hoover, you might be there waiting to hear exactly what they want to say. You need that so badly, and they're going to promise you the world, and everything's going to be changed, and they're going to go to therapy and whatever. And it's nonsense, or lies, or manipulation, or some fantasy they're rehabbing. I don't know. Bottom line is, these BPD hoovers are always for, about, timed by, and have nothing to do with you. They're not about you, even when you're sitting at the other end of that phone waiting for the text or the call or whatever, because you need it, you want it so badly to hear from them again. But if you do get a hoover, it won't be about you. It'll be all about whatever they want in this moment, this period of time, that hoover, and whether or not people recycle, engage in recycle. The borderline hoover promises, no matter what it promises, really promises no change and more rewounding. Borderlines don't hoover you back for you. It's all about them. Borderline hoovers are not about you.
What it really means in its totality, no matter if somebody, like I said, re-engages or not, is that the person with BPD is that singularly focused on what they need and what they want. And they might not even know the difference between what they need and what they want. But again, when people with BPD hoover, even if it is after you moved on and won out, like what's this mean? It means what all BPD hoovers mean, essentially, which is I need, you to do for me. I need to get my identity back for you. And this is not conscious necessarily, people with BPD, but they are only thinking about themselves. And they're trying to get you re-engaged, like I said, for what they need and for what they want. And so they don't have to be alone, and maybe even just more core, primal, basic reasons, like they don't want to be alone, and like maybe the object constancy that you represented as an ex, even after quite a while, doesn't necessarily transfer to the next person they're with, because it just depends if that's really short or if that gets very involved at all or not. But basically, this is typical of, not that people with BPD reach out after a lot of people have healed and recovered. I don't know that that happens all the time, but I'm sure it's not just as common. But anytime they're hoovering you, it's really important that you try to be aware of the fact that if you engage the hoover, if you hear from them, if it's an email and you read it, it's text messages and you read it, or you actually have a conversation with them, they're telling you what you want to hear, and it's not about you.
This is what a lot of people feel after they go through the recycle, re-engage the hoover. But this is what people call borderline gaslighting. Okay, so they don't gaslight exactly like narcissists do, but with these hoovers and how they're not about you, what's really happening there is that the person with BPD, whether knowingly or not, consciously or unconsciously, is manipulating you, your needs, your wants, especially if you just got discarded 2 weeks or a month ago and you really want to hear from them again because you don't know what happened and it's not over for you, because the BPD relationship breakup often isn't the breakup yet, is it? So the thing that you have to remember, if you're at all susceptible to a hoover by somebody with BPD right now in your life, which many people still are, that this is the borderline manipulating what you want to hear, giving that to you. Why? To their own ends, for their own purposes. And what does that do to you? It piques your already having been bubbling, so to speak, needs and wants to get back together and to hear what you want to hear. So it emboldens, actually, in a very painful and not helpful way, people's codependent false hope. Because all of a sudden you think, oh wow, here's the hoover, I'm hearing from him or her, and this means I'm going to get what I need and want, and we're going to get back together. And even if you try that, or several times, it's not going to work out. These are cycles, called cycles for a reason, on, off again, revolving door situationships. So they trigger people, these BPD hoovers, for the borderline, all about the borderline in the borderline's time. They trigger people with codependency back to false hope, to this sort of like, relief place, which isn't really going to be about relief, whereby in the passive nature of a lot of people with codependency, it's like, oh, good, here's my opportunity again. It's going to be okay. Nothing could be further from the truth.
You know how I've said, like, BPD relationship breakups aren't about you, but how the discard and the devaluation, discard, ghosting isn't about you? Neither are the borderline hoovers about you. And they're really not, even in circumstances where it's not like this commenter that he's already moved on and, like, what now what? Kind of thing. Why now? And hopefully continues on with his life and never minds, because the question being asked might mean that this commenter is in a little bit of emotional difficulty right now. It just shows that the person with BPD isn't thinking about, in this case, maybe how long it's been, that this person has moved on. Because all BPD Hoovers are Hoovers about what they need and want. I've said that. But they're just not about you. That's the more important point than they're all about what the borderline wants and needs, because they only Hoover back often to have you reply to ghost you again. And then when they Hoover back and it ends up in a recycle, or there's a revolving door on and off, these situations in limbo in between, it's still going to cycle around even faster every single time people retry these things, recycle them, and you're just going to get hurt all over again. All your hopes dashed again, false hope really, after a certain point, and the codependent denial involved. So I think that while this commenter, it's a different kind of situation, the hope is they do keep going forward, because there are some people who move on too quickly, but this person said they recovered and whatnot. That's more substantial. But I've had clients who have moved on, still wanting to hear from the Hoover, still wanting to hear from the BPDX in a Hoover, because they're not sure, but they're with somebody else. And then it's like, a lot of times people will kind of have moved on, but not really done their healing recovery journey. And then they end up they get the Hoover and they go back. They go backwards and back around. And the thing about that is, it's not even about you. It's about what they need, and it's about what they want at any given time. And all what that's really about, underneath, where people with BPD often don't even know why it is they're doing what they're doing, with all their wonderful promises of, well, I'll go to therapy this time. I understand. I totally blew it. I got, these kind of like non-apology, vague things. And then they might really apologize for something and say, I can't believe I did whatever the case is. And then they'll say, I'm going to go to therapy, and I know that there's this and there's that. And they'll point out some things. And that awareness, don't forget, so much of borderline awareness, especially when they're not successfully treated or that well treated or not treated at all, it's always the false promise. It's often untruths, that they're just putting forward what they really need right now because they can't handle their own lives. And if they're moving on quickly from one to the next, maybe they can't be alone. They feel like they can't be alone. But the thing is, so even if you're in a place where you might still really want to hear from that ex, the Hoover comes not after you've healed and recovered and moved on. You might have moved on a little bit. You might be with someone else, but you haven't done that recovery work. It's not even about you. And codependent denial can be so strong that you can just think, oh, wow, here's another opportunity. I can do this instead of that. I can say this instead of that.
Which really brings into question and calls the person with codependency being hoovered by the borderline back to the wayward notion underpinned by negative core beliefs that one might not consciously be aware of with their codependency, that somehow the breakup was your fault, that somehow, if you'd have done this or done that, now you can try this, you can try, so much better now, so you can do it better now. And, that might be true in a way for the person with the codependency, but guess what? It's not going to matter or change the borderline. It's not going to change the relational dynamics. So this kind of thinking, the Hoover, okay, we're going to try to get back together. People want to try it over. People want to redo. They think they can do it better. They can get it right. You can't get it right. You can't do it better, because even if you're doing it better, the borderline hasn't changed. The dynamic won't change. And you'll be even overgiving and caretaking even more, and you'll still be getting zero-sum back. You still won't be getting reciprocated to or any mutuality from the person with BPD.
The breakup or the ghosting or the discarding wasn't about you either. So I just think that that's the most important thing I can say about this. The hope is they have really done that work and they're moving on. Because the ask and the question, what does it mean, could be a big red flag for this commenter in terms of, are they at risk of still going back to that ex or not? And one would hope not, but many, many people are, whether there was someone else or not, but dependent upon whether or not they've really done the healing and recovery work to the extent that it really needs to be done. But then again, I don't know the time frame or anything with this comment, so it's really hard to say. But just remember, the meat of this message is the borderline always hoovers for the borderline. And they'll say whatever they think that you want to hear, and they'll make all kinds of promises. And really, 9.5 times out of 10, nothing's going to change. That's a situation, even if you just got ghosted 2 weeks ago and you get hoovered, you're going to go recycle. It's going to, relationship recycles, just everything happens faster, and they get back to split the value and ghost and discard. Or whatever that pattern was, whatever they've done to you at least once or twice or maybe 4 times or 8 times, because people are recycling these situations a lot. And the borderline hoovers feed the codependent false hope often, and even when people might be with someone else, having done a lot of the work, but maybe not all of it, for what that person might need, each individual, or maybe gone on to be with somebody, didn't do the stopping in between relationships to do the healing and recovery. People in that situation are at much higher risk to go back. Just leave the person they're with now, or you might just be dating and you're like, okay, I'm going back to the ex. Remember, borderlines always hoover for what borderlines need and want. It's not about you. They're not thinking about you. They might say, oh, I really do love you after all, and you're the best man I've ever known, you're the best this, the best physical intimacy as well, because they'll say this to anybody that they've been with before or they're hoovering. So the point is, just know that when people with BPD come hoovering, whether you moved on or not, or sort of, but not really, it's about them. It's not about you.
You've been listening to the Surviving BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. Our passion is to bring expert information for people that are hurt by someone with BPD. We truly hope you've gotten something from the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. For more or get sessions with AJ, go to ajmahari.ca. See you next time.